Welcome back, everyone, to another edition of the Prove Me Wrong podcast. Once again, I'm your host, Pete Lieb, and I'm glad you joined me tonight. I think I had, as usual, I have a great episode lined up for you. I'm glad you're with me. So, a large portion of my show is focused on exploring and giving voice to topics that are maybe outside the mainstream a little bit. The name of the program is Prove Me Wrong, but in reality, I'm not challenging you, the listener, or my guest to actually prove me wrong. What I'm actually really doing is providing a platform for the unique, an exchange of ideas, a staging point for further discussion. I have talked Bigfoot, monsters, ghosts, UFOs, just to name a few, but I've also done quite a few conspiracy theories, from MK Ultra to Paul McCartney's dead conspiracy to Elvis Presley and JFK being murdered by the mob. They're all fascinating in their own ways. They are a bit of a grab bag, I admit it. But while I do push back when appropriate, for the most part, I don't necessarily debate the point of view. We explore it together. I ask some probing questions along the way, and more just to spur your imagination. So I am very excited tonight about my discussion with my guest, Mr. Brian Dunning. Brian and I are going to declassify, maybe even debunk some of your favorite conspiracy theories or alternate realities tonight. Brian is an author, a producer, and has hosted his own award-winning weekly podcast called Skeptoid since 2006, which looks to explore topics like those I mentioned earlier with a focus on facts, science, and skepticism. He has written the Skeptoid series of books as well on the subject of scientific skepticism, as well as the book Conspiracies Declassified, the Skeptoid Guide to the Truth Behind the Theories. You can find Brian online on briandunning.com, skeptoid.com, and also amazon.com. You can find his books there as well. So once again, welcome to the show, Brian. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you very much. And that's a heck of a plug. I couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you.
Oh, no problem. So we haven't talked before. So if you don't mind, if you could give me just a few minutes and talk about how you got involved with the Skeptoid in this work. You've been there since 2006. What got you started?
Yeah, 2006, back in the early days when it was easy to be a big fish in a small pond.
No doubt.
Get a podcast started. Yeah, I mean, initially, it was really once I learned that such a thing as podcasts existed, which was 2005, 2006. And I said, oh, that looks like a lot of fun. My background had been, I studied computer science in school, didn't want to really do that, switched over to writing for film and television, worked at that for a little bit and decided that really wasn't for me. And so I spent like the intervening 20 years just kind of in limbo, waiting for something to come along that combined my interests of science and broadcasting and podcasts. Boom, there it is right there.
Absolutely.
And I had a half dozen ideas just for kind of pet peeves that I wanted to get off my chest. And I just kind of ranted about those for 5 or 10 minutes. Had 5 episodes of a podcast ready to go, put it up, and it kind of took over my life very quickly. This wouldn't be the experience today when there's literally 1 million podcasts out there.
Right.
But back then, when there was, a few hundred, maybe 1,000 or so, it was much easier to get attention. And I was very fortunate that what I was doing resonated with a large number of listeners, and been doing it ever since. I started cutting back my consulting hours. By 2008, I incorporated, made it a business. By 2010, it was full time. And then by 2012, I converted it to a nonprofit because it seemed that our traction was with educators. And so producing educational material in accordance in alongside the podcast and the videos and the documentaries and stuff that we produce now, it's about a half dozen person sized company now, and we're always doing multiple projects at once. It was just kind of the dream career that just sort of built itself and fell in my lap, much to my good fortune. I just couldn't be happier doing what I do.
This is an interesting show for me, Brian, because you classify yourself as a skeptic, but the way I've always looked at the term a skeptic, it's the person who is skeptical of the mainstream idea. not necessarily the person who is skeptical of the skeptic of the mainstream idea.
Yeah.
You know, that's kind
it's
of
a very
circular
problematic
thing.
term. Yeah.
How do you classify the work that you do?
So I mean, like it being a problematic term, exactly. When you say, "Oh, I do skepticism," then people say, "Oh, you're the people who think 9/11 was an inside job and
Right.
we didn't really go to the moon." It's like, no, actually, kind of the opposite of that. So, if you look at the formal definition of skepticism, it's simply having a standard of evidence, setting your bar pretty high for what kind of evidence you'll accept, and that's how we basically filter out 99% of the nonsense that's in pop culture by applying this standard of evidence. It's basically the scientific method is the skeptical process. I wish if I could go back in time, I would not call the podcast Skeptoid because it has that stigma attached to it where people believe that it means the opposite. I'd give it an obvious name like the Urban Legend Show, something like that people go, "Oh, I know what that's about."
Well, I'll be honest with you. If I could go back in time, I would also probably not say "prove me wrong" because people think that it's a debate show. I'm here to challenge you, and we're gonna fight the whole time, and that's not the case. It's more I have an alternate view. Prove me wrong, right? Right. That's kind of where we're at with it. But I get what you're saying.
Hindsight is 20/20 for all of us, isn't it?
Well, so the conspiracy theorist label, really in the environment we're in right now, that is a way to easily end a discussion. You throw that label out, and immediately I have said everything there needs to be said about you. I've told you what kind of person I think you are. You're a kook, and so I no longer have to engage with you. If I don't like what that person's saying, I just declare it, and it's over. Hasn't the exchange of ideas and different viewpoints kind of been the hallmark of human development throughout history? Where did that term conspiracy theorist come from, and why is it so derogatory?
Well, it's derogatory because it brings all of this baggage, and much of it well-deserved. When we talk about conspiracy theory, when we talk about MK Ultra, whatever the conspiracy theory is, what we're really talking about is a false conspiracy theory. Okay, we're not talking about Julius Caesar getting stabbed by all the senators. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's a crime. Watergate was a crime, and yes, it can be described as there was a conspiracy as part of the crime that happened. But a conspiracy theory specifically refers to a false conspiracy theory. Okay, 9/11 was an inside job. That's false no matter how you look at it. That NASA hoaxed the moon landing is a false conspiracy theory. So by definition, it's a negative term. When you call someone a conspiracy theorist, you're saying someone who believes something that's not true, and in most cases is provably not true, or at least beyond any reasonable standard of evidence. So that's why, like I say, skeptic is a kind of a loaded term. So is conspiracy theory and conspiracy theorist. It would be nice to be able to have these conversations without using that terminology, but it's so deeply ingrained now that if you don't use it, you sound crazy.
So when
you make up new terms,
when you're doing your weekly podcast, and you have quite a few of them there, I think you have like 400, 500, something like that now at this point. Quite a few.
738.
Oh, excuse me,
700.
Today. Wow. So how do you determine what to believe? Where does your information come from that may be different from what is readily available online? Taken for granted right now, it is so difficult in our social media age with Photoshop and video editing, and people just attributing things to people who didn't actually say that, right? You see memes all the time with Donald Trump's face and Hitler's words. How do you determine through your research what's real and how then be able to apply it to your show?
So I have an advantage in that I've been a professional science writer for a decade and a half, basically. So I have a tremendous amount of experience knowing where to go, knowing what to exclude, knowing what to look at. And what's tough about that, being in that position, is if I say that, I sound like I sound really arrogant as well. Oh, well, I just know how to do it.
It's just easy for me. Yeah.
I mean, the fact is, it takes a hell of a lot of experience to be able to go out and know what to look for and what not to look for, and what to pass on, and what you can generally safely embrace. And when you're talking about scientific research, okay, like vaccine research for COVID-19 right now.
Yeah.
I can tell you pretty specifically where to go, what you want to look for, what you don't want to look for. And that is, in a nutshell, you want to go for what's already been published and gone through the peer review process. And you want to hold with a grain of salt, the stuff that's science by press release, which is 95% of everything that's coming out right now.
Right.
We're in a really strange situation with COVID-19. This is very unprecedented. And whatever vaccine comes to market first is probably going to be under emergency use authorization. It's not going to have gone through the full process. And so science by press release actually probably carries a little bit more credibility now than it would in normal times. If there's an article that comes out right now about, say, global consciousness, one of these kind of nutty ideas that the thoughts of the human race as a whole affect random number generators and affect mechanical devices. There's people who believe this kind of thing. If there is science by press release that came out about that right now, it would be immediately ignored. You would know not to give any attention to that at all, because you're dealing with something that's fundamentally implausible and has a much higher bar that it's going to have to go through before it's something that I would even be willing to read the paper. It would have to have already passed some kind of peer review and been accepted by a journal that has some kind of a reputation. So, I mean, what I'm trying to do is paint a picture of the whole landscape of what you've got to know is probably reliable and what you've got to know is probably not reliable.
So going back to your vaccine example, would you, given your background and what you do and what you've been doing for decades, would you feel comfortable taking that vaccine? Would that science by press release, would that scare you? Especially given one of the biggest, if we're talking conspiracy theorists right now, is around that the whole COVID pandemic. Regarding this is the way we usher in the new world order and the cashless society, and they're taking an illness which is real, but not as life-threatening or as deadly as they say it is, and they're enabling an opportunity to shut you down, quarantine you, force you to get vaccinated, force you to go cashless so we can track every movement you make. And then they say, oh, well, we've also come out with a vaccine through press release, like you're saying, without the appropriate level of trials, without the scientific testing that a normal vaccine may go through. Would you be comfortable taking it? Would it scare you?
So I can answer that question by saying that I have already signed up for all the clinical trials that I can find. I would put my money where my mouth is there. Now, again, this is a little bit of a special case. We're talking about COVID-19, the drug companies worldwide that are working on these various vaccine candidates. I believe there are 7 really strong ones, and of those 3 that have really passed the bar of what we can rely on as safe. They haven't made it all the way through approval. They haven't made it all the way through safety testing. But these are companies that know their business, and they know what to do, and they know what's going to work and what's not going to work. We're dealing with sciences that are very, very thoroughly established over decades. So I would take, probably any one of the 3 I wouldn't hesitate to take right now. One of them was just published yesterday. I think was the first time we had an actual peer-reviewed publication. It was preliminary results, and it was from phase 2 clinical trials. They haven't yet gone to phase 3. And that was, I'm spacing on the name of the pharmaceutical company right now, but it's one in the UK. Their vaccine, I would not hesitate for anyone to take that. In fact, I think that vaccine could probably be distributed worldwide tomorrow, if it were possible to manufacture it, obviously. And I think we'd expect to see no more negative reactions than we do from any common vaccine.
Do you have was the expectation that those would be more reliable than the typical flu vaccine is? Because I know that a lot of those typical flu, it's really a kind of a crapshoot. They're guessing because there's so many flu strains. They're educated guess as to which one might be this year, and they give you that one. Is the expectation that this vaccine would be more reliable than that?
Well, you're kind of comparing apples and oranges there.
Yeah, a little bit.
The reason a flu vaccine might not be reliable is because you're taking a vaccine for a different disease than the one that's actually going to hit you. We don't have that situation with COVID-19. COVID-19 is COVID-19, and the vaccine for it is going to protect us from that. There's not another version of that or something that's out there.
But it is already mutating, though, right? I mean, it has already been changed. Again, I don't know. May not be up to speed with the level of research that you have, but it is already mutating. Depending on what day it is, it's either transmissible through surfaces or it's not transmissible through surfaces. It's either affecting only people over a certain age, or it's affecting now babies. The information coming out is so unreliable to me. You know, when I keep hearing it, and every day you hear a new issue, and it's almost like they're trying to say, okay, we don't have enough fear, so let's put another level of risk on top of this and keep ratcheting it up. What have you been finding?
It's definitely a dynamic situation.
Yeah.
You know, when this first came out, we were going by our experience with SARS and MERS, which was a great starting point. But it turns out that this disease spreads differently and has different characteristics as far as how it's going to be transmissible. And so that's why we've had the different changing information. It's like, okay, so don't worry about surfaces so much. Now it looks like, breathing particles are really the big thing we need to worry about. So the information has been changing because this is a new disease. The variants that we're seeing are all still very much, they're the same disease. Any given vaccine solution would still cover all of these. It hasn't. We're not talking about like different flu strains where it's an entirely different disease with different chemical markers on it that are going to work with one vaccine and not with another per se. So when a vaccine does come out, I think that reliably, and again, don't take my word for this, I'm not a public health official, I'm a science writer, but my expectation, based on my experience, is that reliably anyone who takes the vaccine is not going to catch COVID-19. Of course, there's going to be a few skips, but they're going to be in the basis points. It should be as safe and effective as any vaccine currently on the market.
So how can you trust, and I'm just, you were talking about your research, your sources. I'm assuming then that the social media, the online sources are pretty much out. I even have a hard time trusting things that you read, even like historical books. And there's always that famous line, history is written by the victors. The way that the history is written is based on who wins the war. And, you're even seeing that now. I think there's a push towards the 1619 Project, which is trying to kind of rewrite the origins of the United States, from 1776 to actually 1619. I think that's maybe potentially like a Black Lives Matter movement to repush the history. How do you know what to trust? Again, when it comes down to I'm pulling a book on, I'm going to trust using 9/11. I'm going to trust the 9/11 Commission report over the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth report. How do you decide which one of those is the one you want to believe? Because both of those, especially,
two very different questions.
I know I did. I'm sorry. I jumped around. Like I said, I've been excited about this, but because in those cases too, do you not consider? I'm going to stay with the 9/11. Do you consider the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth? Do you consider that to be a reputable scientific paper, something that you could lay down and say these people have the credentials and the qualifications to make determinations on what happened?
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
Not even close. I mean, this is a very small group of people who were lifelong conspiracy theorists, anti-government conspiracy theorists, and they started from their preferred conclusion, which is that 9/11 was an inside job. And then, they opened up this website that allowed anyone to come and sign up, and you could assert that you are an engineer of some sort.
Yeah.
I mean, I am on there. My dog and our cat, since passed away, are both on that list. It's a ridiculous list. It shouldn't be given any credibility at all. It started from an idea that was fundamentally unscientific, which is you start with your conclusion and work backwards from there. And they have essentially no scientific credibility. They don't have no bar for what kind of evidence or what kind of people they accept. So no, that's an easy no.
Well, let me ask you this then, because a lot of the things you just said there were a lot of the criticisms of the IPCC report for the 97% consensus for CO2 man-made climate change. And they said that, again, they started with what they wanted to find, that CO2 was the cause. Humans were the cause of climate change. So again, they started with their final conclusion, and they worked their way back and tried to figure it out. And that was also 2,000 people. It was a very simple questionnaire, 3 questions. Do you think that there's climate change? Yes or no. Do you believe that humans have a part in climate change? Yes or no. And not all 2,000 of those people were climate scientists, but that is now the 100% smoking, boom, 97% consensus. That is where people, that is the term they always throw out at you. Settled science, as President Obama once said. How is that document different?
Well, you're talking about a science that's been very well established for over a century. I mean, it was the 1800s when we first understood the effect of greenhouse gases and climate. So I would not agree that the IPCC is a bunch of people who started from a preferred conclusion. They started from a very sound scientific foundation and went on with the specific goal of saying, okay, how are we going to minimize this problem? What are the impacts throughout all of these systems? Natural systems, economic systems, societal, cultural systems, and how can we minimize that, and how can we develop policy that will address this, while causing minimum disruption to other systems, economic, for example. Kind of the big straw man argument against climate change action is, hey, we'd have to destroy the economy to fight climate change, which is just silly and comes from a position of extreme ignorance. You'd have to literally do no research at all to come to that conclusion, or just limit your research to whatever your preferred YouTube channels are. I mean, yeah, the IPCC, whenever you go to all the nations of the world basically and say, send us your best experts and we're going to put everyone in a pot and see what everyone comes up with and find a consensus, you end up landing on another problematic word, which is consensus.
Exactly, yeah.
Now, in popular usage, in non-scientific usage, consensus means a bunch of people get together and they agree on what they're probably going to, what they're going to say. That's a consensus in normal usage of the word. In science, consensus has a very different meaning. It means you have broad experimental replication. Okay, we have the same study results coming from replicated studies all around the world. That's what consensus means from a scientific perspective. Very, very different from people just deciding and agreeing what their line is today. People don't know that though. People hear the word consensus and they go, oh, okay, that just means a bunch of people from name whatever political party I don't like coming up with something that they think is going to harm my economy.
But should there ever be a consensus in science? I mean, wasn't it a consensus at one point that, smoking wasn't bad for you? Or was it a consensus at one point that the earth was flat? Way back when, it was the scientific consensus that the earth was flat, right? I mean, didn't everybody just universally agree that?
No, that's one of the fascinating things that I've learned in my research.
Okay.
I did a series of episodes on the flat earth and the history of flat earth belief. And it turns out that throughout all of human history, in every society we're aware of, there is never a case where the educated class of people believed the world was flat.
Okay.
We go all the way back to the Greeks. Were doing, in centuries before Christ, we had experiments proving the curvature of the earth, calculating the circumference of the earth to a very high degree of precision. It was fascinating. And this idea that people ever thought the world was flat really only goes back to the 1800s. And it goes back to a group of biblical literalists who interpreted certain Bible verses as meaning the earth must be flat. And so they sought out evidence that would confirm that belief.
Okay.
It's a fascinating story. It's one that I didn't know until I sat and did the research, and that's one of the things I find so exciting about my job.
No doubt. I mean, that's definitely one of the, if there was a conspiracy, I mean, although I don't know why that's a conspiracy, because what is the conspiracy? What would, so some of those things, you know, they throw it into the basket of conspiracies. But to me, a conspiracy means I'm keeping it from you for some type of gain. Me keeping from you that the earth is actually a sphere, or actually flat when it's a sphere, what am I gaining from that? It doesn't seem like that makes any sense. That just seems like an alternate reality that I don't personally, I agree with you, I do not personally, I don't see where that comes from at all. But, or even something like with the, just using maybe the pyramid construction. People say that's a conspiracy. Maybe a conspiracy by the Egyptian government to claim something, or is it just a, you know, at this point, what are they gaining by saying that we built the pyramids other than some prestige? To me, that's just more of an alternate, potentially an alternate solution that maybe it was built by someone else some other time, aliens. You know, if you're on History Channel if you're on the History Channel before 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it's the Egyptians. If you're on History Channel after 11, it's aliens. So depending on when you watch. But so I never understood that. So what are, you know, I think that you don't believe in UFOs at that point. I would think that you would say that UFOs are probably not real. That's also a conspiracy theory. The government's trying to not hide that from us. Or what about the paranormal? Do you believe that the paranormal is real? 45% of adult people, or people in general, believe in ghosts. Do you find any evidence for that?
Well, first, let me back up a little bit, and I want to agree with you strongly that the term conspiracy theory is often inappropriately applied to something that's really just, you know, a weird belief.
Yes.
Or, you know, something that's strange or untrue, or, you know, someone thinks their dog is psychic, and we'll call that a conspiracy theory when it's not. So I agree with you completely that the term conspiracy theory is very often misused.
Or Bigfoot. Bigfoot's in the woods. Why is that a conspiracy? What's the benefit of hiding Bigfoot in the woods? Yeah,
that's just a misuse of the term.
I know I had a gentleman on my show once talking about Bigfoot. He was hunting Bigfoot, and he was talking about it, and he estimated, I estimate there's 4,000 Bigfoot in the United States. I'm like, well, how the hell did you come up with that number? Where did that number come from? You haven't found any pieces of one. You've never found any type of a carcass, a habitat, nothing. You found nothing, but you are projecting 4,000 animals in the woods somewhere. How did you come up with that? You know, those are the kind of questions I like to ask. How are you saying that information? But I'm sorry. So paranormal. Do you believe in that and those type of things as well? That's where we were at.
Sure. I mean, I'm happy to go through a checklist with you of, you know, does Brian believe in this? Does Brian believe in that?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to ask you some of what, I wanted to ask you what some of the more popular theories
and I'm happy to do that. I mean, I'll give you my sort of blanket statement, which is we have a pretty good idea of how the universe works, how the physical world works. We understand physics pretty darn well. We understand, you know, mathematics and a lot of sciences, a lot of earth sciences. And so you can get a pretty good idea on what's likely to be true or not just by having those basic understandings, a basic level of science literacy. Something like ghost is, first of all, it's a totally undefined term. We don't know what a ghost is. If we said, I think I saw a ghost last night, I would have to ask, okay, how did you match up your experience with ghost? Does a ghost have a temperature of X? Does it have, does it mass a certain amount? Does it bend light? It's got to have a set of properties that we can use to then match up an experience to, was this experience a ghost or not? Well, we've never caught a ghost. We've never been able to measure a ghost and understand what a ghost consists of. So we can't say that any experience is consistent with a ghost encounter. And moreover, we don't yet have any theory on how or why a ghost might exist. So there's really no starting point. I would be as excited as anyone else if we got any of those things. But for now, I'm going to say, no, there's no reason, there is no credible reason to believe in ghosts at this point.
So then safe to say you've never had an experience where you felt that way. You've never had anything that's ever happened to you where you thought, well, maybe that's, but I guess maybe in your situation you thought, I must be too close to my circuit breaker and I'm getting some high EMF readings and I'm having a physical reaction. I'm just wondering, because I know a lot of people say they don't believe it until something weird happens, and then they they start to feel that. You
have to be able to say, I don't know. And you have to be able to understand that I don't know is an acceptable answer. And often it's the best answer.
True.
And often it's the most honest answer. So let's say I did have a very weird experience one night. I'm able to say, I don't know, without skipping that and then jumping to a conclusion, which is, I don't know, therefore I do know, and it was a ghost.
All right.
I don't know, therefore I do know is something that I see every single day doing my job. And that is about as bad as logic can get.
No,
I am able to have weird experiences without making an unsupportable conclusion that it either must be a ghost.
When you are researching these conspiracy theories and you find that you have adequately explained one or quote unquote debunked one, what are those results typically attributed to? Is it some faulty memory, some miscommunication, bad reporting, the way it was recorded through history?
There was a TV show on a while ago, and the title was Fact or Faked.
Yes, I remember that.
I love that title because those are the two least likely possibilities. And the show is called that as if that's the choice. Either this weird experience was a fact, it was actually a ghost in the graveyard, or it was faked. Someone was hoaxing it.
Right.
Those are the two least likely possibilities. What happens in almost all of these cases is that someone was honestly mistaken, which happens to all of us every day. We are all wrong about things. We're all mistaken about things. We can all make misinterpretations. We're all subject to all kinds of perceptual errors. We all bring confirmation biases. We all bring preconceived notions. We all bring all sorts of these things that are going to affect our ability to think clearly. And so we're all wrong about things all the time. I see a light in the sky and I decide, well, that must be an alien spacecraft. I mean, it's easy for you and I to sit and say, okay, here's the flaws with that kind of thinking, blah, blah, blah. But I was honestly mistaken. It wasn't a fact that that was an alien spaceship. It wasn't a hoax. I wasn't trying to fool you by lying and saying I saw a spaceship when I didn't. I was simply honestly mistaken. And that's where I believe the vast, vast majority of Bigfoot sightings, ghost sightings, et cetera, is simply people being honestly mistaken.
How do people react? I think in your position, pretty much every day you're kind of giving them some factual rationale behind the things that they experience or the things that they think they see. How do people react? Because they typically get real emotionally affected when you kind of come in and tell them straight on that, you know what, I don't think that light you saw in the sky is a UFO. I think that light you saw in the sky is maybe a meteorite, maybe a satellite even going overhead. It could be a lot of things. How do you find that most people interact? Because like I said, most people I see now, it ends up being a shouting match. How do you navigate that? Yeah.
Well, first of all, I mean, don't mischaracterize what my show is. My show is not a debunking show where I'm out to go and tell people that their ghost is wrong or their cherished belief is untrue. That would be a terrible show. That would be an inherently negative process. Instead, I'm interested in finding out what's new, what's the sociological reason that this large group of people believe they experienced this or that, whatever it is. What can we learn from this story, this famous urban legend, whatever it is, that we go, wow, that's really interesting. That's not only new and cool to me, but it's something that I can apply to other urban legends that I've heard. I try to make my show inherently positive. So I don't get as much hostility as you might expect. Although I still do get it from a lot of the early shows. In the first couple of years when I was doing this, the shows were more of a debunking show. I remember one on Morgellons disease. Morgellons disease it's a fascinating story. There's a condition called Munchausen's by proxy.
Yes.
Now, Munchausen's syndrome is when maybe you're someone who's got some social problems or whatever, but what ends up being your social connection in life is going to doctors and saying that you have some made up disease that doesn't really exist, and just getting attention from doctors. That's what we call Munchausen's syndrome. Munchausen's by proxy is often, it's almost always with mothers and children, where mothers say, my child has this new mysterious disease, and none of the other doctors will diagnose it properly. And so she just goes from doctor to doctor to doctor to doctor to doctor, looking for someone who will confirm her belief. And this is what Morgellons disease came from. Came from this one woman who believed that her son was extruding plastic shards from his skin. And you look at him on the microscope and you pull him out with a pair of tweezers, and you'll find that this kid had a scab on his face or on his arm, and he had simply rolled in his blanket, and the fiber from the blanket got embedded in the scab. And this mother believed that his body was extruding these fibers. I did this episode probably 2008, a long time ago. And to this day, not a week goes by that I don't get an email just absolutely filled with rage and hostility that I'm denying this person's disease. Therefore, I'm part of the problem. Yes. I'm preventing them. I'm not acknowledging it and preventing them from getting cured of it. So I've learned a lesson from this happening often enough to say, no, I'm not going to make a show that simply attacks somebody's cherished belief. That's a terrible, terrible thing to do. But if I can instead show them something that will give them an alternate perspective to consider, that's a positive experience for them, that's what I really strive for.
Even if you do it inadvertently, even if you don't come right out and say, I think this is wrong, there's definitely a scientific reason for this. You're absolutely right. You'll continue to get that feedback, and that word denier just keeps coming out all the time. You're a denier of this, you're a denier of that, and denier is almost as bad as conspiracy theorist. That's the interchangeable word. So if I don't agree with you on every point that you make, and again, a lot of times it breaks out by political affiliation, things like that. If I don't agree with every point of your political affiliation, I'm a denier in some way, and I'm vilified. So I can completely understand why you'd want to pose that in a way that's, here's the facts, here's the science, in a non-threatening, non-accusatorial way. You had mentioned earlier about the flat earth, and I thought that was really interesting, about how when you did your research, you actually found that it was not the generally accepted idea at the time. Is there another situation where you had been reading and you found something, kind of a eureka moment, that you learned something in your search that you weren't looking for, but ended up being incredibly interesting?
Quite a few. In fact, this question is one that I've been asked so often that I finally did a 2-part episode of the podcast, which was how to surprise a skeptical podcaster. And it was just a series of these subjects that I did that surprised me, where the conclusion surprised me. I've been doing this long enough now that I can come to most stories, and most stories are ones that people email to me, and I'd never heard of them. But I can come to most of these and pretty much get a good idea right off the bat whether this is real or not. Mm-hmm. And I'm probably 70% right on that, but that 30% is really damn interesting. I can give some examples.
Please give me an example. It'd be great.
So some popular urban legends, and my particular passion ends up these historical mysteries. Those are the ones that I enjoy the most, more than debunking paranormal claims or multivitamins or whatever it is. I really enjoy these historical mysteries, and particularly the ones that I had read about a lot as a child, and come to believe wholeheartedly, and they just kind of stayed with me in the back of my brain until I grew up and became a science writer, and now I've been fortunate to have the opportunity to go back for a living and go back and re-examine these mysteries. And one of them was Flight 19, which, if you remember, it's one of the most famous stories of the Bermuda Triangle. It was this flight of 5 TBM Avengers on a training mission out of Florida, and all 5 of them crashed.
Correct.
And if you read the books about this, you're going to read that they reported their instruments were going crazy, their compasses were spinning, all kinds of crazy stuff was happening, and they just disappeared. So I had no idea what was going on with that, and I really, really wanted to know. Well, it turns out this has never, ever, ever been a mystery in the slightest to the US Navy. But when the Discovery Channel is going to make a TV show about it, they don't go to the US Navy and ask them, hey, what actually happened with this? They go to popular authors who have written these books sensationalizing the Bermuda Triangle and largely fictionalizing this story. And there is no mystery whatsoever, never has been any mystery about Flight 19. You want me to spoil it?
Yeah, please. I would love to know.
So the flight leader of these, the flight instructor, these were 4 trainees and the flight instructor in these 5 planes. This is a guy who had gotten lost during World War II in combat over the Pacific twice and had to ditch and lost aircraft twice. This guy had some unaccountable inability to sense direction in any way, shape, or form.
Wow.
They had flown out, you know, Florida comes down south. It sticks down into the ocean, right? On one side, you've got the Atlantic Ocean, and on the other side, you've got the Gulf of Mexico. They flew out east from Florida over the Atlantic Ocean. He thought they were west of Florida over the Gulf of Mexico. He was that far off on his ability to judge direction. And while they were out there, the Navy has the radio transcripts of this whole thing. The students were telling him, dude, we got to turn around and go back to Florida. And our emergency, our standing orders is follow the sun, fly toward the sun, because that's west, and that'll get you back to Florida. And since this guy was confident that they were over the Gulf of Mexico, he said, no, we've got to keep going east. And they kept going east. And at one point he said, yeah, my compass has got to be wrong because it doesn't know what's going on. We got to keep going east. And so and they ran out of fuel and just ditched somewhere way out over the Atlantic Ocean. Who knows if we'll ever find them? That's all that happened. And this is thoroughly documented. And so you had this one author of UFO books, and he began to write about the Bermuda Triangle named Charles Berlitz. And he took this story and he just started with these little bits, and he just expanded them ridiculously to all of the pilots reporting that their instruments were going crazy. That never happened. It was this one guy who had his sense of direction so bad that he thought his compass had to be wrong.
How does the U.S. Navy continue to give that man a plane? If you're saying that he's already ditched twice, he's already been lost twice. It seems to me like just as important as your eyesight would be your sense of direction and your common sense, that if you are based on the time of day, and if you think even if you think you are on the west side of Florida, if it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon and you're flying, or you wouldn't be. It's just the time of day would tell you which direction you should be going. That just seems incredibly. That does not seem like a good look for the U.S. government, that they're giving this man a plane and a squadron of cadets or trainees to fly with. That's depressing. See, your story didn't make me feel better. Yeah. It made me feel depressing. I was in the Marine Corps. I was in the Marine Corps at a high school and kind of got a little bit of taste of that with the U.S. government myself. So it's unfortunate.
But, it truly is unaccountable.
But what do you think then about? Because the U.S. Navy, you said, had this story. What do you think then about the Navy releasing and basically validating that video, several videos regarding the unidentified flying objects? What do you think about those?
So to do this, you have to understand the personalities involved. Mm-hmm. And it goes back to these people at To the Stars Academy, they're called. Tom DeLonge, the former rock band.
Yeah, I know him.
Whoever, and all of the people that he's worked with. Leslie Kean, a lifelong paranormal and UFO author, and she was the one who's part of their group that she wrote the New York Times articles. And the Pentagon has never said that these are UFOs, these are mysterious, we don't know what's going on with these. To the Stars Academy's press releases said the Pentagon and the Navy think that these are mysterious videos. If you ask any pilot, any pilot familiar with the FLIR on an F-18, he will look at those videos and he'll tell you exactly what's going on. There is nothing remotely even interesting about them, except they show kind of a neat optical illusion, which is, but if you're a pilot and you know how the FLIR works and you understand things like perspective, there's nothing interesting in those videos at all. But here you've got these people at To the Stars Academy who are very firmly entrenched in their belief that alien visitation is real and actively happening. They're just searching for anything that they can find that will confirm this belief. And since they don't understand the FLIR on an F-18, they don't understand these optical phenomena involved. To them, they just look at it and say, that's my UFO. That right there, that proves my UFO. They get Leslie Kean to write a newspaper article for the New York Times. They get it syndicated all over the world. As you know, news agencies no longer have science editorial departments. Throughout the 1990s, as news began shifting online and there began to be less and less profit in selling newspapers, they've had to minimize editorial staff, and science editors were among the first to go. So we no longer have meaningful fact checking on articles like this. They just promote Leslie Kean's articles that says, hey, the Navy thinks these are UFOs and these are aliens or these are mysterious. Nobody challenges it. Nobody knows to challenge it. There's no science editors anymore. So unfortunately, it spreads down, and the internet loves it. The internet absorbs it and amplifies it.
So the actual, I'm not sure exactly what his rank was, but the actual captain of the squadron that was out there, the people who took the video themselves, he was on, I believe it was Joe Rogan's podcast, and he was talking about it personally. So it wasn't somebody outside of that, and it wasn't somebody making it up. It was the actual person who was filming that. What is his motivation to, because if he knows what the FLIR is, he knows perspective, like you were saying, he would know very easily what it is. What would be his motivation to create a story or fabrication?
Well, obviously I can't speak to that. And I don't know who that is, and I didn't see that that episode. So I really can't comment on that.
Okay. But
what I can comment on is the numerous pilots who have explained that video. There are examples. One of the best websites for this is Metabunk. It's run by a friend of mine. So take that for whatever it means. Mick West.
Should I believe
and he's collected, there's a bunch of videos that show these exact same phenomena.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, because it's a common thing. When you see that bat wing shaped aircraft apparently turning, that's just the gimbal on the FLIR lens as the F-18 maneuvers. And so you see that same shape in virtually every video taken from a FLIR. There's literally nothing unusual about that video.
Well, like I said, I can't remember what that gentleman's name is, but he is on a Joe Rogan podcast episode where he was talking about that video that he shot and what he saw and how he was basically following it himself. So maybe just, for future reference, that's something to look into as well. I just don't remember his name. I wasn't expecting to bring that up.
You know what? I mean, for every single urban legend type mystery like this, there are people who come forward who claim to have inside knowledge and reveal more and more facts about how strange this was.
For sure.
Another really famous one is the Rendlesham Forest UFO, which has been dragged through all the TV channels a dozen times, which is where back in I think it was the 1980s, there was a US Air Force base in Great Britain, and there was a bunch of lights flashing in the trees, and a bunch of airmen from the base ran over to it, and they saw a UFO sitting there in the trees. Now, when you compare what actually happened back then in the 80s to what that story has just exploded into today, they have almost nothing in common. And pretty much everyone who was there as an 18, 19-year-old airman in the 1980s, and they're, how much older today, they will tell you a very, very, very different story than they said on that day. So it doesn't surprise me at all. Forgive me if I sound a little bit cynical. It doesn't surprise me at all that we're going to have people claiming to be the pilot in that video saying that it's unexplainable or has to be an alien.
Yeah, no doubt. So, and that comes back down to what we talked about previously, where the story takes a life of its own. The story continues to be morphed from what the actual events were to what how it's ultimately reported, whether it be in a news publication or on mainstream media. And media outlets, television and print, they're private companies, and they definitely have a reporting bias, in my opinion, based on ideological leanings of who's in charge, right? You can see it, the classic is CNN versus Fox. They definitely they can take the exact same statement by the president. Here's the statement. One, it's the most divisive statement in history. The other, it's the greatest speech that America's ever had for unity. And it's really just because those people are artists when it comes to wordplay. Picasso of the sentence. They can create a truth just by phrasing it in the headline. But that said, what are some of the most conspiracies with the most traction right now that you see? What are the things that people are still contacting you about, or some of the really most popular episodes that you've done?
Well, sadly, the ones that are consistently the most popular over the span of 13 years now are anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. It's the Rothschild banking family is behind all the world evils, or George Soros is behind all the world's evils, or 9/11 was created by Jews. That is what consistently comes back, and it's, to me, extraordinarily distasteful.
What's up with all the hate for what is with all the hate for Jews? What is?
Is there a history to that? So I can tell you my version because I've had to deal with this so much. My opinion, and this is not something that I have run by academics who study this for a living. My opinion is that it goes all the way back to the Jews are the ones who betrayed Jesus to the Romans.
Wow. Okay.
And I'm not, whether that's true or not is not the point. That is what people believe. That's what the Bible says. And so I think the Jews are kind of always going to be viewed as the ultimate villains in the eyes of, WASPs, basically.
But I mean, even last week you had professional athletes, black men, professional athletes, black entertainers, who are still somehow furthering that message that somehow the Jews are evil. And I just can't understand it this many hundreds of years later. I don't know what their religious affiliations are, if they were taught from children that the Jews betrayed Jesus, or if they're just parroting something that they potentially have heard from somewhere else. And maybe that's part of the problem too, is they continue to parrot things that they hear from some other uninformed individual. But you just hear it last week, and it's just amazing to me that is still going on, and they're still being persecuted like that. It's similar to the Holocaust, and I've heard these people talking about Holocaust deniers, and I'm not really sure what that means. Maybe you could clear it up for me as well. Are these Holocaust deniers denying that the Holocaust happened, or are they denying that the number, just strictly at the number of dead that are reported?
So there's a whole spectrum. I mean, you've got people who hold each of those beliefs and everything in between.
Wow.
Some of them say that the number is grossly exaggerated. Some of them say that, yes, that number is right, but it's because they simply immigrated. They left Germany, so of course they don't show up on the censuses anymore, and everything in between. Holocaust denial is something that is just not going to go away.
Yeah.
I don't think ever. I mean, it checks all the boxes for. Again, I was about to say conspiracy theory, but is that really a conspiracy, or is it just an untrue belief? I don't know. Sometimes that line's kind of blurry, but a lot of people like to find that the Jews are lying. The Jews are claiming victimhood in order to further the New World Order or the Illuminati or whatever the hell they are this week.
Okay. Because I was just wondering, I mean, that's always got me, what exactly are you denying? I mean, I'm a firm believer in two things can be true at the same time. I am a believer in that the Holocaust could have happened. You know, the Holocaust did happen. I can believe that Jews were persecuted and killed for being Jewish, for no other reason than that, and whatever, beliefs that the Nazis had, that could happen. I could also believe that maybe that number is 4 million versus 6 million. I don't know, but I don't know exactly that any of that is so fervent in my mind that you would go around spouting that from the hilltop. Either way, it's an incredibly horrible event. Why are we arguing about it? Why are we fighting about whether or not it happened? That seems incredibly in poor taste to me, personally.
I couldn't agree more.
What about, because the one I hear a lot are the moon landings. The moon landings being faked, faking one just kind of some of the evidence that that I've been told in the past. You know, they lost all the flight telemetry. They no longer have the technology to go there. A lack of the lack of easily definable photographs of the lunar surface and the landing sites. I've heard that. The radiation protection in deep space can't get through the Van Allen radiation belts, and even just what happens when you are past those belts, because those belts actually protect us. Once you're out there, you're exposed. What have you found? I mean, then it's a battle of, okay, this is what NASA's telling us versus what? Nobody has ever been there. You know, what leg do you have to stand on there?
This is the one time I ever did a 3-part podcast episode.
Yeah.
Was addressing the moon hoax, moon landing hoax, whatever you want to call it, moon truthers.
Mm-hmm.
And I made it a 3-part episode because part 1 was about the history of this belief, how and why it arose. And again, this is another case that surprised me because it morphed directly from this biblical literalism, flat earth belief into, therefore, the Mercury program was a hoax, because that's when they first started sending back photographs that you could see the earth was actually round. And that morphed to denying the reality of the Apollo program. So that was a fascinating aspect, where the belief arose from. Part 2, I was talking about a lot of the things you just mentioned, specific claims made by the factual claims made by the people say, oh, this proves that it was a hoax. Here is a picture of a moon rock that has a prop number on it, or the flag looks like it's flapping when we know there's no air on the moon. Kind of all the specific things. And then I thought long and hard for what I wanted to do for part 3, and I decided to go, okay, let's go with all of the hard, absolutely provable, undeniable evidence that humans from Earth were on the moon, and then physically came back to the earth. What is all of the hard proof of that? And to my surprise, there was quite a bit. And that's the part of the episode, the part of this 3-part series that I think is the best and the most important, because I think there's stuff that everyone, no matter who you are, can learn from that and go, oh my God, that's really cool. I never knew that. That's really interesting. And a lot of that comes from the moon rocks that were brought back. Have these fascinating traits, these characteristics that even today could not possibly be faked. And a lot of people don't know this, but the Russians also brought back moon rocks. Mm-hmm. It was from an unmanned rover that blasted up a very small sample, but they have their own moon rocks. And if there is anyone in the world who was going to prove that the US faked the moon landings, it would have been the Soviet Union, right? And they had their own moon rocks. They looked at our moon rocks and said, yep, these are absolutely legitimate.
I've had people who they've held 2 conspiracies that are in direct conflict with each other.
Sure. Yeah.
One, they said that we never went to the moon. That was a complete and utter falsehood. It never happened. 2, they'll say that the moon is hollow and it's a spaceship. Well, how would you know? Because then they'll start saying, well, the composition of the moon is so much different than the composition of the Earth. There's a much higher proportion of titanium on the moon than there is on the Earth. It's obvious that those 2 bodies didn't come from the same body and spin apart. One was coming through. Well, how the heck would you know that? You say we've never been there. So how can you take the information that they brought you back and then use that as your argument for why the moon is hollow and it's a spaceship and it's not part of the Earth and it shouldn't be where it is. You see what I'm saying there? So if we didn't go, we could not have brought back rocks that would prove that it's a different composition than the Earth, right? You know, so you see what I'm saying there? But both of those beliefs. We never went, and it's a spaceship, and it's hollow, and it's in a circular orbit around the equator of the Earth in an orbit it shouldn't be in. There's no way we could have trapped it that way through gravity. All kinds of those things, but they rely on the evidence that they don't believe that we brought back. So, you know, it's just part of the
cognitive dissonance.
Yes.
is what that's called, and it's something that we all have to some degree. We all tend to believe things at an emotional or organic level that we know are not true at an intellectual level, or vice versa. That's a very fascinating area of introspection where we can all benefit by working harder to find and identify those areas in our own thought processes, because it's something we all do.
Well, while I did try at the same time, I did suggest, I said, well, again, I'm one of those people who can believe two things at once. So I can believe that the United States or humankind went to the moon. I can believe that. They went there and they came back. I can also believe maybe they did have a soundstage where they pre-programmed some of what they were going to be doing there, because it's safer. Because, you know, why would we be filming things that we do on the moon? And the amount of times they fell on camera, all you need is a slight tear in your suit and you're going to die on national television. Everybody's going to see it. So I could believe both of those things. I could believe that they were there. I could also believe that while they were there, they were running the video that they shot on the soundstage in Arizona, so that if something terrible did happen up there, the youngsters of America wouldn't see it on live television and be scarred forever. Again, even that's far-fetched, but I'm at least able to say I could believe both of those things happen concurrently. So, but I don't know, maybe I'm a free thinker. I don't know. But
if I can address that,
sure,
because that brings up something that's really interesting. Something that I have learned and relearned 1,000 times over the course of doing the Skeptoid podcast for so many years, is that there are people who are experts in just about any field you can come up with, who know stuff that you never would have dreamed,
right,
because that's their field and it's not your field. And what you just said would have been completely persuasive to me until probably 5 or 6 years ago, when I saw a video made by a guy who's an expert on video technology from the 1960s. I'm sorry, I do not know this guy's name or how one would find his video on YouTube. But I'm sure some of the people listening to this right now know what I'm talking about. And if you find it later, put a link in the show notes to this guy's video, where he's just talking about how many things, in how many different ways it would have been impossible using the video technology from the 1960s to do exactly what you just suggested.
Mm-hmm.
And listening to this guy explain this was just a wonderful experience of listening to someone who knows so much more than I do about a subject that I never would have known that there was even that much to know about it. But it's wonderful stuff.
You know, to me, that's not as, because again, I get that our technology wasn't, but our technology was good enough to go to the moon. You know, in reality, our technology at that point, we had. Did I lose you? Are you still there? Oh, okay, sorry.
I was looking frozen.
No, yeah, you did. We had our best. We were using LPs at that time. You know, we were using vinyl. You know, we had television still in black and white. We made it to the moon. So I have a hard time believing that our technology wasn't good enough to create a video, but it was good enough to get us, 480 million miles, whatever. I mean, I don't know.
Well, why not? What name a piece of particularly high technology that was part of the Saturn V system?
That's what I'm saying.
A big metal valve, a rocket nozzle.
Yeah,
these are not particularly high technology things.
That's
the computers were running vacuum tubes. That there isn't even a device on my desk here that has. Even this stupid old Zoom recorder probably has more computing power than than the Saturn V had. It was not a high technology project.
Probably, you're absolutely
It
right.
was a slide rule project.
That's why it was so amazing to me. That math is done. Like the Apollo 13 movie, right? When they're basically figuring out how to save their lives longhand, with math in the cockpit while they're flying. So
super impressive stuff.
Yeah,
people do not give enough credit to what humans are capable of.
I agree.
People are always saying aliens must have helped us stack that pile of rocks because humans never could have done that. I find it so frustrating that there's so much zeal and enthusiasm behind the movement of trivializing the human spirit and humans' ability to accomplish.
Yeah, I do not believe that aliens moved anything, but I could be persuaded to believe that maybe human evolution, human waxing and waning of civilization has occurred more than once over the course of our lifespan on the earth. That we are right now thinking that we are the best that we've ever been. We've never been better than we are right now, but we have no proof of that, right? And in reality, if I parked a tractor in the middle of a field in 1,000 years, that tractor's gone, completely gone. If I just walked away from the Eiffel Tower right now, in 1,000 years, the Eiffel Tower is gone. So what remnants are you going to have of those previous civilizations, i.e., Atlantis? We have myths, we have wives' tales, things like that. I would not find it nearly as hard to believe that those pyramids and the Sphinx were simply created by us in a previous cycle of our civilized living, and then we faltered. We had a cataclysmic event. Maybe we caused global warming and we got buried, and then we lost that technology, and then we had to kind of slowly work our way back up. But I do not believe, for whatever reason, I don't believe that aliens came and just moved it with their anti-gravity. That doesn't play.
There's about 2 million geologists in the world who would love nothing better than to make their entire career by finding that layer in the sediment that would prove an ancient advanced civilization.
Absolutely, for sure. I have a couple more minutes and just a couple more questions. So, were there any conspiracies that you initially set out, not necessarily to debunk, but set out with the idea that this is going to be something that I will debunk or I will give the facts for, but you ended up actually proving? Was there anything that a conspiracy that you actually said, I thought it was going to be false, but it ended up being true?
So I've never ever set out to debunk something.
Okay.
I've never once set out and said, okay, I'm going to do research that arrives at this conclusion. That is exactly antithetical to everything that I do.
Yeah.
So I have never set out with my conclusion firmly established first. I've had suspicions and expectations about where a story was going to end up after doing the research. I would say the closest one, and being the author of a book on conspiracy theories, a question I get all the time is, well, what's a conspiracy theory that has ever been proven true? And well, truly there aren't any when we limit it to just what's actually a conspiracy theory. But the closest I can come up with is what we call numbers stations. And numbers stations, for those not familiar with the term, are these, you go back and roll the clock back a few decades, and there was something called shortwave radio.
Mm-hmm.
And if you went to Radio Shack, you could buy a shortwave radio receiver. And this was a shortwave radio signal is something that in the right atmospheric conditions can propagate all around the world. You have a powerful enough transmitter, you can send a signal that someone on the other side of the planet can receive with an inexpensive Radio Shack shortwave receiver. And if you turned to a shortwave station, and this was during the Cold War, so not that long ago, 80s, 90s, early 2000s, if you turned your shortwave receiver to a certain station at a certain time of day on a certain day of the week, you would hear an automated recording reading off strings of numbers, 5 digits at a time. It would repeat each string of 5 digits, and then it would move on to the next block, and it would repeat those.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of these broadcasts would start with a little ditty of music or someone shouting or something, some kind of a little signature. And they were called numbers stations, and nobody knew what they were. And the person who was telling me about this before I did the research on it was saying, I think they're probably something like oceanographic research buoys transmitting their data. I go, okay, well, something like that sounds reasonable. It's a fairly prosaic explanation. But the tinfoil hat theory was that these are governments transmitting instructions to their spies. I'm saying, oh, okay, well, that's a little bit, get smart, James Bondy. It's probably not that. And then, if everyone remembers, think back to September 11th, 2001. A couple of days after that happened, there was something in the news that nobody caught because there was something else in the news. And so nobody noticed this. But a group of people, including a highly placed Pentagon intelligence official, were arrested for espionage inside the Pentagon. And all they had been doing was using a laptop computer to type in these numbers from a numbers station that was being broadcast out of Cuba, and then decrypting those and receiving their instructions from the Cuban government. It turns out that numbers stations were exactly what the tinfoil hat crowd thought they were. They were governments transmitting instructions to spies. And after that happened, we started arresting people all around the world. All throughout Europe, people were getting arrested for listening to numbers stations.
Well, that's similar to the CIA with the MK Ultra program and that in mind control, using drugs to control minds. They kind of, I guess they maybe not fully confirmed that, but that it did exist. It was something that they were doing, and also even with the gentlemen that were being treated with, or they were being given syphilis, right? Just to kind of see what the long-term effects of syphilis were. Was that
you're referring to the Tuskegee experiment
exactly.
and MK Ultra? Yeah. So I mean, the thing with these is there's some truth to both of these, but the pop culture version has been egregiously exaggerated into something that did not happen. For example, nobody was given syphilis.
Okay. They just weren't treated for it.
They weren't treated, which was ridiculously unethical.
Yeah, absolutely.
However, it was unethical by today's standards and not by the standards of the 1950s, which is tragic but true. When the CIA wanted to learn things, they wanted to learn how syphilis is going to impact Black people versus white people.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted to know if LSD was going to be useful as a truth serum or as a mind control drug. Could we possibly get foreign leaders to do things they wouldn't normally do by giving them drugs?
Right.
And so they had these programs run. And the way these programs were run was they set up a front company that would make grants to university researchers. And university researchers would do all of this work according to the ethical standards of the day, which unfortunately were terrible in many cases. That's really the extent of MK Ultra and Tuskegee. And we look back on that today and we rightfully say, those were incredibly unethical and illegal and but only by today's standards. By the standards of the day, unfortunately, that's how we did things.
But the problem with them is that we were told it wasn't happening and we were lied to about it. And then they find out that it was happening. So then they start to think, well, what else are you lying to us about? What else are you doing right now, which ethically would be completely outside of our standards? And then that's where that whole truther, denier, conspiracy theorist, skeptic, that's where that whole group of people comes from. That fool me once, shame on me crowd, right? And so you'll start to see this, and then everything, the Las Vegas shooter is a conspiracy.
Yep.
Newtown is a conspiracy. Every thing at that point, Parkland, that's in Florida here where I live. Every one of those things now was a government operation, trying to for gun control or somehow to destabilize the local population or working towards an election result. It's only getting worse with social media. I blame social media personally. I think the memes are the best part of social media, and everything else is the worst, because you can no longer have a civilized conversation. You can no longer disagree. You can no longer disagree civilly again. And a lot of these people have gotten real comfortable with being rude to other people and being offensive and attacking other people without really any kind of repercussions of that, right? When I was a kid growing up, I knew immediately if I'd said something wrong because I got popped in the mouth. Somebody hit me in the face, either my friend or whatever. There was an immediate reaction, instant karma. And we don't have that anymore, and it gets easier and easier to be just horrible to people. That's just me. I'm sorry, I'm going to hop off the soapbox real quick. My last question for you, Brian, and I really appreciate you spending time with me today. This has been great. What is your advice for a newbie, the junior skeptoids out there who are trying to get started with their critical thinking skills, building their party conversation toolkit, right? What reliable sources should they start with? I know, you have yours, built already. Where should they start?
I think you should start with going to the reading list. Go to the books written by guys like Carl Sagan, Marvin Gardner, James Randi, the people who were kind of establishing the fundamentals of how we can apply scientific skepticism to get a better understanding of how the world actually works and what's likely to be true within that framework and what's not. I don't have a simple answer like, oh, get your news from this website and not from this website. That's not how it works. It's about developing thought processes and understanding how and why those thought processes work. There's a number of great podcasts that you can listen to. You can listen to Skeptic's Guide to the Universe for one. My podcast, Skeptoid, I cover a lot of this type of material. I've had episodes on, kind of developing the skeptic's toolkit. Here's the 15 rules you can follow. The information's out there. We also produce documentary films at Skeptoid Media. You can watch any of those. We've got Principles of Curiosity at principlesofcuriosity.com. It's free. Got the really old one from 2008, Here Be Dragons, which is still one of the best. And that's got a great reading list in the film as a great way to get started. And, as I would cite my own experience, it's just been the wild ride of a lifetime. Conspiracy theorists are known for saying, wake up, sheeple. But really, once you learn the tools to understand how the word really works and, where you're being given false information, being able to discern what's real from what's not, that's kind of a waking up experience in itself that I can't recommend highly enough. It's been an exciting ride for me, and it's something that I love to share and hopefully get other people started on the path.
Well, as I knew, Brian, I knew that I wouldn't get to probably a third of what I actually wanted to talk about in an hour. I probably could have talked to you for 4 or 5 or 6 hours. I do appreciate your time with us. Maybe we can have you come back in another time and we can focus in on something specific. But
Sure.
Thank you so much. Once again, the website is briandunning.com, skeptoid.com, and all of the other resources that you just mentioned, kind of going through. Do you have any other movies currently in production, any other books that you're writing, anything else that you wanted to plug real quick?
We do. We're just wrapping right now our first actual full-length feature documentary film.
Nice.
That's going to be out there on the market like every other feature film. It's called Science Friction.
Okay.
You can see some clips and stuff at sciencefriction.tv. We're actually uploading the first. We just had the color done, and it's absolutely right at the tail end of production. It's just about to go out to the agents and start the road show, and then eventually it'll end up on the streaming services. But sciencefriction.tv.
Sounds great. I love documentaries, so I will absolutely check that out. Thank you so much once again, Brian. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for spending some time with me, and hope you stay healthy up there. You'll be the first in line for that vaccine when it comes out.
I sure will.
All right. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thanks.
So once again, that's Mr. Brian Dunning. Brian Dunning is from Skeptoid.com, and he has he comes from the mainstream point of view. And a lot of the people that I talk to on this particular program are the freer thinkers, maybe. If you talk to Brian, he would say that they are, kind of blatantly ignoring a lot of the science and common sense associated with most all of these conspiracies, whether it be the moon landing, the 9/11 inside job, climate change, obviously the Holocaust. I think we talked about that for a little bit as well. But I mean, some of them have a kernel of truth to them. I do think that there are some pieces of evidence that cannot be just so easily and cavalierly dismissed. I do think that there are things that I would still consider reputable, and I wouldn't just blindly kind of toss them in the trash. Like I said, I did see the actual podcast myself with the lieutenant that ran the fighter squadron, who was actually doing the filming on that particular UFO that you see go around YouTube. They calls it a Tic Tac. He was on the Joe Rogan podcast. You can look that up as well. I'm not exactly remember what his name is, but I don't understand why he would lie about it. I don't see what his personal gain would be to lie about it. But usually, to me, a conspiracy means you have something to gain. You have something to gain by keeping that secret, by holding the secret. I don't see what flat Earth or what the government would have, what the benefit would be to hide the fact that the Earth is flat. I don't see it. Our lives would continue exactly the same. And logically, it just stretches the mind. So I would love to have a flat Earth person on the show, though. I would like to talk about what science they use or what ways they're trying to prove their point. I know I did watch a documentary once where they were trying to do an example with a laser light, and it did not work the way they wanted. They didn't have a powerful enough laser to actually shoot the distance they were trying to get. So it was kind of a wasted experience. But if they could bring me some evidence, I would listen to it. I'd look at it. If it's the one that really gets me, and we weren't able to really get into it more, were the pyramids. And again, I just don't think. I do agree that human ingenuity is incredibly under-heralded. It's, that we don't give humans enough credit for the amazing things that they do. That doesn't mean that an infinite number of slaves working 24 hours a day could still put those blocks in place within 20 years. I know that we can't do it now, and we are allegedly significantly technically superior to what we were then. So that's one of those things that you would have to show me. You would literally have to show me how that's done. We would have to read off the hieroglyph off the wall and say, okay, this is how they said they did it. We're going to recreate it. Even just the act of leveling the area to the point where 3,500 years later or more, depending on who you ask, that pyramid hasn't moved at all. It has been perfectly balanced and aligned for 3,500 years minimum. I want to see that before I'm going to believe it. I'll be honest. Some of the other things, that particular one, the mainstream would have to show me how that was done for me to believe it. The remainder, the conspiracy theory person would have to show me exactly some proof that those things are wrong for me to believe it. But I like to hear those things. I like to hear different points of view and get an idea of the evidence that they have. I do think, and I have seen some shows regarding the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. I do not think that everybody associated with that movement is a kook or a whack. I do think that there are real engineers and real architects who were a part of that process who do believe what they have claimed, that the buildings came down on 9/11 as part of an organized demolition. And at the same token, I do not believe that all 2,000 people who signed the IPCC governmental document on climate change were all the best and brightest climate scientists in the world. I do not believe that. And I do not believe that the way that question was asked allowed them to truly give a good enough answer that would be able to stand on for the next 15 years like they've been doing or 20 years since Al Gore was doing this on An Inconvenient Truth. They were using it back then, saying that in 13 years we'd be underwater. 13 years have come and gone. Now they're going to say 12, 13 more years we'll be underwater. Those 13 years will come and go, and then they'll say it again. I don't like the word consensus when it comes to science. There should never be a consensus when it comes to science. There's always somebody who should be looking that 10th man as it. If 9 people all believe, that 10th man should be looking for the alternate viewpoint, the alternate truth. If we just start going around saying it's settled science that rising CO2 increases heat, when there really is no recreatable evidence that shows that so far, as I know, and I've had several scientists, real scientists with real medical degrees, real doctorates, who have said that it is not a correlation between those two things. So, as with anything, you're going to have a pro and con. And it was great to have Brian on to get an idea of how he comes up with his research material. Where does he get the information that he uses to lay out the facts, lay out what the facts are on each one of these topics? I would love to talk to him again. He has 700 episodes of that show, Skeptoid.com. I'm sure I could find another 4, 5, 6 hours worth of information that we could talk about just from what I do here. Before we go tonight, what are your thoughts on this? Do you think that Brian's just way off base on something? Am I way off base on something? Is there a particular quote-unquote conspiracy theory or alternate reality based on, your viewpoint? Because the term conspiracy theorist has really been given a bad connotation in the last decade. But is there anything that you truly believe? Do you truly believe that Newtown was a hoax? That the World Trade Centers were an inside job? You can tell us about it. You can contact us on the Prove Me Wrong podcast Gmail page. It's provemerongcast@gmail.com. Leave us a message. If they're thought-provoking enough, I'll read them on the air, and we'll use it as a follow-up to this episode. If you want to drop us a line on our Facebook page or on our Instagram page, you can do that as well. Prove Me Wrong is the name of the program. Just look for those online and you'll find us. If you're just looking for other opportunities or ways to listen to the program, we are on all podcast platforms: iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Tunein Radio. Anywhere where you find podcasts, you can find the Prove Me Wrong podcast. Like and subscribe to the show, and you'll be notified when a brand new episode is released. Typically, we release them every week. So once a week, you'll be given notification that the new episode has come out, just like this one, and you can be the first on your block to listen. We're also on YouTube. You can see the scroll right here to like and subscribe to the YouTube page. Once again, we release a YouTube page, a YouTube episode once a week, and you'll be notified when a new episode is available, and you can be the first to watch it. Before we leave tonight, our podcast tonight has been brought to you by Java Remix. Java Remix is the perfect blend of 100% organic Arabica coffee infused with nano-emulsified CBD. Start your day off on the right foot with a great tasting cup of coffee with all the demonstrated benefits of pure CBD. Java Remix offers traditional ground coffee as well as single-serve K-cups in both regular and decaf. And if you aren't a coffee person, Java Remix also offers CBD-infused teas and even beauty products like bath bombs and body scrubs. As an added benefit for our Prove Me Wrong listeners, if you go online right now, that's javaremix.com, and enter the promo code Prove Me Wrong, you will get an additional 20% discount off of your entire shopping experience. And Java Remix also offers free shipping on all orders over $40, so you have no reason not to give it a try. Once again, that's javaremix.com, promo code Prove Me Wrong. The Prove Me Wrong podcast is brought to you tonight by ZendoZones citronella burners from JT Eaton. They are shaped like fearless bug-repellent tiki gods, so you can let Surfin' Stan, Hawaiian Howie, and Luau Lily bring the islands to your backyard with ZendoZones citronella burners. ZendoZones uses natural 3% citronella candles and incense cones, perfect for patios, decks, backyards, campsites, poolside, and more. You can enjoy the outdoors again. They're now available on Amazon.com and at select Ace Hardware stores, so please go on out and collect them all today. So once again, for the Prove Me Wrong podcast, my guest tonight was Mr. Brian Dunning from Skeptoid.com. Go ahead and check that out. You can also find him on briandunning.com. And I am Pete Lieb. This is the Prove Me Wrong podcast, and we will see you again soon.